All right, so let's compress this drum percussion snare hi-hat we got going on here. We're going to grab a compressor. Now, normally I would also have an EQ before it. So I'm going to put an EQ there just so we can use it in the future, because we're gonna want an EQ before the compressor, but we're not gonna need to do much. And that's mainly only if we're gonna wanna add more sounds to the song later, but it's just a good rule of thumb to have one before. So I'm gonna turn it off though, and just kind of leave it there so we can just have it there. Easier access to it later. And here we have this compressor. So I'm gonna bring this attack all the way to the quickest it can be. We're gonna bring, who cares what it is right now? Release all the way the quickest it can be. Turn off auto gain. I'm gonna leave the ratio where it is right now. It's at a 4. And I'm gonna bring this threshold down when we're listening to this percussion. I'm gonna bring the threshold down until we get to around a -6. Now we're not gonna leave it there. That's just kind of where I wanna start. So we did have some peaks that hit -7, but that's fine. Now, if you hear, and you can even look, if you look at the spectrum that FabFilter gives you, those hi-hats are supposed to be quieter. It's not supposed to be like the snare and the hi-hats the exact same level. You're gonna lose the life of the snare. And normally you want the snare and the kick reasonably punching kind of the same for most music, especially new age pop music, at the end of the mix. And so you kind of want that snare to be loud, but you do want to control it, and you do want to kind of control all the sounds that are going to be in this percussion, maybe in the future or not. I'm going to just pull the release up to around 26 or so, just so that we're not having a release problem. And then we're going to raise this attack until we think that we aren't affecting the snare too much. Another way to do that is to also raise your attack all the way back to that 250 milliseconds, and then bring it back. And as you're pulling it back, listen to the snare mainly. Right there. So that's where it's really being affected, is that quick attack, 7 or 5 or so. And so I'm gonna start bringing it up from there. And we really only want to get that, like I said before in the kick compression video, that -3 dB. That's really what we want to go for. How much it sounds as though we're losing a lot of life in that snare, and we are cutting. So let's see. Now we haven't boosted any frequencies on the snare, the shaker. This is just, we cut frequencies in the last video. This one we are going to be compressing. I'm going to bump up this attack to about 37. Let's see if we can pump this ratio. That's a pretty harsh ratio. Maybe that's the problem that we got going on right now. Maybe 2.5. Just pushing up that ratio to see if we can get to that -3. Ratio is not going to do it. So what we have right now is a super long attack, 62 milliseconds, very quick release, high ratio, about a 4, medium ratio it is, and a really tight threshold. And we're getting a lot more snap out of this snare. We might be losing some life, which we can fix, but we're getting some snap. Listen, without it, turn it on. Now, I don't like it. This is not what I would be at right now. But I like that snap we're getting on that attack. So I'm going to bump it up a little more, maybe to 70. Yeah, now we're getting some punch, but it's still taking too much life out. So I'm going to lower this ratio. I'm going to raise the threshold a little bit. Disable the compressor and listen. Enabled. So it's very slight, but we got 2 dBs. But I do want to tame it a little more. And something else you can do would be to go back to that -3 and then pull back your wet and dry mix, but we're not going to do that right now. I'm honestly just going to duplicate this compressor and then make a really quick attack. We'll say 1.7, a release of 50 milliseconds or so. Now this is just to tame everything. It's going to be super, super slight. We're only going to do like 1 dB. Oh wait, and we got to go back to this compressor. They're both in the same position. This compressor, and we gotta volume match this. So let's see where we're at. Negative 17.2 dBs on the master track with the compressor. Without, negative 6.6, 7.266. So we can boost it about 6 dB, or 0.6 dB. Look at that. Math is fun. Now you can really actually hear at equal dBs, at equal volume levels, what it's actually doing differently. So let's go to this other compressor here. Of course, we don't want that. That's going to be ridiculous. But we do want that fast attack to keep some of the nips out. And we can raise that a little bit, but let's stick with that now. Let's raise that ratio to around like not a full 10 like we did on the kick, but more like a 6.5 or so. I'm going to bring the threshold all the way up, and then I'm going to lower it until we get to around -1, -1.5 reduction. And just to be safe, let's make this knee around 6. Knee is going to be when the sound comes in, how fast that curve is. So we have a 6 dB curve. It's going to be quicker. At first we had a -18 or an 18 dB curve, which is going to be a slower curve. So the sound has more, it can gather more sound before it hits the compressor, the threshold. And I want it to be quicker. Pretty much I want it to not really hit the hi-hats as much and more just nick that snare, just so we can tame anything that might be a little invasive, because it is a dynamic snare. They're quieter hits and soft ones, which is good. We just want to tame them a little bit. There's definitely one snare in there that's just really hot. I'm gonna try to raise this attack a tiny bit. There we go. So you don't want to do too much. You just want to tame those tips just so it doesn't ruin anyone's ears or punch through or ruin the mix. And that little dB is actually going to give you a little more punch too. So now we're at -16.6, and this one's going to be, let's see. So we can get about 0.3. This is just how I mix. I like everything to be very mathematical. If I start with a certain level, I want to end at that level. I don't want to be decreasing or increasing the volume, just because you ever want to group all the effects you have on one channel and listen to how they sound off and on. You're not going to have any volume differences, and you're going to get the exact audible differences. It's just better to mix that way. It's safer. You want to have a consistent volume throughout all your effects, at least most of them. When it comes to mixing, mastering can be different. So that's going to be the compression for the main part. That's just basic compression, nothing crazy. We're not manipulating the sound too much, and we're not taking out too much. We're just being safe and compressing some of the dynamics. of the percussion. Now, in the next video, we are going to move on to the sub bass and just the basics. We're going to EQ and compress it. A lot of other crazy stuff we can do with the sub, depending on how it sounds. But in the next videos, we're just going to focus on the basics, the EQ and the compression of the sub bass.